The Assad regime in Syria looks to be on the brink of collapse. Just how bad are things, and why are other Middle Eastern countries preparing for the worst? Plus, do we now know that the U.S. is pretty directly involved in the fighting? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so when we look at the Syrian map, you can see that there's been a huge tectonic shift in just the last 36 hours or so, namely the city of Hama. This was an area that Syrian regime forces were supposedly going to use as a kind of redoubt, right? While they lost the key city of Aleppo, they were hoping that by holding Hama, they could establish a sort of stable front line. But instead, it looks like regime forces have fled once again. And now you're seeing an absolutely insane turn of events as the rebel forces are actually just rolling through previously regime-held positions, pushing very close to, I believe this is Homs, another major city. And you can see here that they are basically trying to cut off the remaining Syrian forces from kind of retreating through this river. So you can see here, this river's likely a substantial barrier and is probably seems to be, I don't know, part of a rebel effort to sort of bifurcate Assad's forces, right? So likely carving out one area here in the west of the country with not that many cities, just like some towns. It looks like the biggest one might be Latika. And then you will have the other portion of Syria that is currently government controlled, also kind of cut off, right? So by splitting these forces in two, it's going to make it really hard for Assad to resupply even his limited forces. But you could see he's also not alone here, right? You're looking at rebel factions also being emboldened here, pushing near the occupied Golan Heights, and just sort of, and you know, while they're not making tremendous progress here in the south, what is most important, I think, is that you're seeing continued pressure being applied to the regime. And again, their key city of Damascus, the fact that there's fighting even this close to Damascus of any flavor is itself probably pretty troubling. Because here's the thing, it may look like they're very far away, but you have to understand with Syria that there's no fighting to be had in these big open areas, right? So even these small towns, right? You're seeing, look at this is just a vast open field here where if you're a defender, you're going to get just chewed apart by drones, mortars, and artillery. There's literally no cover at all. So they are actually much closer to Damascus, the rebels, than you might initially think. So I think you're going to see them, again, bifurcate regime forces. You may see them try to sort of isolate the government forces here, or if there is still this collapse of the government, you're going to see the rebels push for Damascus, I think. So before we talk about what Middle Eastern countries' intelligence agencies are saying about this, I wanted to say two things. The first is I know that something like 90% of you guys that watch these videos aren't subscribed, but do hit that subscribe button. Doesn't mean you're going to see, you're going to be like flooded with my videos. It just helps me as a metric to primarily to tell sponsors, hey, this is how big an audience I have. And it doesn't cost you anything. So if you can do that, that would be huge. And if you want to further support the channel and get access to some of the uncensored combat footage from the front lines of these conflicts, well, you can do that over on combatvetnews.com. This is my version of Patreon where you can become a member, pick up the tiers, right? Obviously, the specialist tier is going to get you access to those twice a week uncensored combat videos. But the other tiers, of course, are going to confer other benefits. This is the best way to keep me independent. Keep me able to report honestly, even though I end up being critical of, well, just about everybody. So again, I can do that because I have you guys have my back. Okay. So according to some reports, the Israelis are actually preparing for the collapse of the Assad regime. Initially, these rebels, I think, were probably being sort of pushed to kind of embarrass or to draw Russian and Hezbollah forces away from some of the key fighting in Lebanon and Ukraine, respectively. But it seems more like the Assad regime's key allies are, well, stretched too thin and are too attrited to meaningfully support al-Assad. So now you're seeing the IDF assess that the rebels may actually threaten to collapse Assad's regime entirely. And one of the things that's kind of bothered me is that there's suddenly become this movement towards rebel apologists, right? And don't get me wrong, I hate Assad. Assad's an asshole. But a lot of people are suddenly framing these rebels as the good guys. They're not. They're Al-Qaeda affiliated. Some of them were in prisons for their affiliations with ISIS. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. And their goal is to establish a caliphate. And if there's one thing we learned from the Taliban, it's that they're going to make a lot of promises that they're seizing power in order to trick the opposition to think, well, it won't be that bad if these guys take over the government. And then they take over and they do exactly what their religious beliefs mandate that they do, which is usually brutal repression and what we would consider crimes against humanity. So again, I'm not exactly rooting for these rebels to take over Syria, and I'm certainly not rooting for the Assad regime. I just hope all the teams have fun. But again, you've got the U.S. and Israeli intelligence that they say are, quote, detecting signs of certain collapse in the Syrian army. And one of Israel's main concerns is that the rebels will advance as far south as the Israeli border with Syria in the Golan Heights. Right? And Israel has conveyed messages to the rebel leaders to just stay away from the Israeli border, which is, of course, something they're highly likely to do because they're not stupid. They understand that the Israelis are not the Assad regime, and the reason they can succeed at all is because of Western support. And how do we know that there's Western support? Well, the answer is A-10s, baby. Why? Because there's been a bunch of viral videos coming out of Syria of A-10s being used to strike Assad positions, which is itself kind of insane, right? But how do we know then that this is U.S. forces, right? They say it fuels rumors that U.S. forces are supporting Syrian rebel advances. Guys, if the A-10s are literally hitting Syrian government positions, there's only one country on planet Earth that flies the A-10, and it is the United States. No other country fields a 52-year-old aircraft in order to strike these. It's just not worth it for any other country to have a specialty aircraft that can only really fly in what's considered a permissive battlefield, a battlefield where there's zero air defenses. And essentially, that's what the current places in like Syria are. And so the United States, also it's because even the Pentagon was like, we got to get rid of this thing because it just is too narrow in purpose. But, there was a huge lobby in Congress to keep the revered warthog, which is sort of insane. All right. Imagine if in World War II there was a lobby to be like, you can't stop the old sailing ship, the power of sail. What happens if they run out of coal? Like, whatever. You can't retire old Bessie. And the Navy was like, yeah, sure. Or Congress passed a law that said the Navy has no choice. It must maintain a fleet of sailing ships. That's kind of what the A-10 is, right? Modern fighters can do more or less the same job better. I know people are going to be in the comments being like, but it go burr, and the burr sound very fun and that good. And it's like, I don't know, man. Like, probably not. Like, can an F-35 not do the same thing? Right? Can an F-16 not do the same thing? Right? So, again, I think the takeaway here is that while some folks are saying these A-10s flew in a show of force, but were not involved in a strike, I don't know, man. I wouldn't put my A-10s in the air just cause, So, yeah. Anyway, Air Force Major General Pat Ryder, the Pentagon's press secretary, said that the targets that were hit in Syria were not directly hit by the A-10s, weird, okay, but presented a clear and imminent threat to U.S. and coalition forces. So again, it's not clear that these are in direct support of these rebels. It may simply be the U.S. protecting itself. But why the Assad regime is suddenly considered a threat is a question for anyone to figure out. So again, I think the two people that at least we can all sort of hope for is, the SDF, right? The Syrian Defense Forces, who currently are trying to take over again, draw a nice clean boundary here at the river. This is something that I think they've wanted to do for a long time. You can see them holding Raqqa. You can see them really just trying to, I think, occupy areas that are, of course, controlled by the Kurds, but also to kind of create a natural geographic barrier where at all possible, in order to limit the ability of these rebels to conduct any kind of crossing operations, right? The Kurds have been burned once by an upstart jihadist group in the form of ISIS, and they're not going to see it happen again. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you to Bill Collier, Robert Colburn, Gars Marnie, Gina Questa, Chris Corsa, Defense Karis, L90, Petra Tororo, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do it without you guys. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.